History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 509th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, this is a location that I heard about from the BBC. They did a multi-part series on this. I encourage people to check it out. This is called The Witch Farm. Now, usually we don't do a lot of poltergeist episodes here on the podcasts. We've never covered Amityville because I think it was a big hoax. But this one has a lot of real stuff going on, I think. Of course, we always leave it to the listeners. We'll see what you guys think after this. Before we get into talking about the Witch Farm, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Mark, Kurt with a K, Brittany with 2 T's, Madison, Chelsea, Monica, Sam, Lynn with an E at the end, Tracy, and Jennifer.
Thank you so much for joining our Spooktacular crew.
And now this moment in Oddity.
We are all familiar with the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, which can be fairly dark in nature. Many nursery rhymes and childhood songs can have dark connotations as well. For instance, Ring Around the Rosie has been said to be about the circular red rash, which was an indicator of the bubonic plague, while A Pocket Full of Posy was related to the flowers kept in plague doctors' pockets to lessen the stench of dead or dying people. Similarly, the Muffin Man song has a lesser-known dark reference as well. Do you know the Muffin Man? The Muffin Man? The Muffin Man? Do you know the Muffin Man who lives on Drury Lane? Now, this rhyme has some historical truth behind it because during the Victorian era, there were indeed muffin men who would deliver fresh-baked goods right to people's doors. But some tales tell terrifying, tragic stories meant to warn children about a muffin man by the name of Frederick Thomas Linwood. Urban legends said that Frederick was a 16th century baker turned serial killer. He was told to have used mouth-watering muffins that he tied by string to lure children into his clutches, where he proceeded to kill them. The full moniker linked to this death was the Drury Lane Dicer. Although there is no documented truth to be found for the story, a childhood rhyme with a Hansel and Gretel spin certainly is odd.
This history podcast is haunted.
And now, this month in history.
In the month of October, on the 10th in 1886, Griswold Lorillard of Tuxedo Park, New York, created the first tuxedo. Lorillard came from a family of wealthy tobacco magnates who lived just outside of New York City. Because of their wealth, they belonged to the Tuxedo Club in Tuxedo Park. This particular October, a formal debutante's ball was being held. Lorillard didn't care much for the jackets men wore because the tails were hard to sit and dance with. So in frustration, he cut the tails off his coat. His friends liked it and decided they wanted the same. They also all chose scarlet satin vests to wear under their tailless dress coats. When the group entered the ballroom, they drew gasps from onlookers. Are you clutching your pearls? They definitely ruffled the feathers of the older society, with one quipping that the boys looked like royal footmen who ought to have been put in straitjackets long ago.
Oh my.
However, the new style caught on and was dubbed the tuxedo after Tuxedo Park, where it was first introduced.
One of Britain's most haunted homes was nicknamed the Witch Farm. A young family experienced 7 years of haunting activity while living there. This was meant to be their dream home, but it became a nightmare. Some people believed that ley lines of dark energy ran under the property. There are some who thought that the family who lived there were perhaps having mental issues. Many people witnessed or experienced unexplained things at this property to lend credence to the stories. And the history of the land certainly has fuel to spark paranormal activity. Join us as we share the compelling haunting of the Witch Farm.
The Brecon Beacons is a mountainous region in Wales that is now a national park that gets 4.5 million visitors every year. Very popular place.
Goodness.
The name was derived from a Welsh term for peaks and the name of a medieval kingdom that was once in the area. There are numerous burial cairns throughout the hills, and dozens of hill forts dot the landscape. The area of the Brecon Beacons, where the haunting we're going to discuss is set, has long been associated with mysticism and the occult. People claim that witchcraft and sorcery were practiced here for years, and many landmarks are even named after witches. Celtic myths go back hundreds of years, and many claim there are curses connected to the land. It was here, in the shadow of this mountain range, that a young couple would start a family together on a rural farm, a farm known by some as the Witch Farm.
The official name of the farmstead is Hale Van Og. The couple were Bill and Liz Rich, and the year was 1989. Liz was Welsh and 3 months pregnant when they moved in, and Bill's son from a previous marriage, 14-year-old Lawrence, joined them on the farm too. Bill was English, and during this time in Wales, English people were not real welcome, so some of the neighbors weren't keen on having Bill here. Other than that, everything seemed fine at the farm. That was until the Riches received their first electric bill. That bill was huge. 750 pounds, which is equivalent to 2,000 pounds today.
Yeah, if I got that as my 1-month bill, I'd have a heart attack too.
Absolutely. Something was causing a large drain on the power in the house. The Riches asked the electric company to come out and check the meter because it clearly was measuring wrong. The company checked everything and they could find nothing wrong with the meter. The breaker box was checked and there were no shorts. The company was perplexed, but still insisted on being paid. The Riches didn't have that kind of money, so this became a bit of a fight back and forth with more high electric bills and no one being able to figure out what the issue behind the drain could be. Liz and Bill were frustrated, but they certainly didn't think there was anything paranormal about the issue. That thought didn't cross their minds until they heard the sound of disembodied footsteps running through the house. That was unnerving enough, and then Liz heard the door slam even though the door never moved.
Shortly after those two incidents, the couple caught the scent of sulfur. They couldn't figure out where it was coming from, and then the scent changed to an incense smell. Bill decided to ask a neighbor if he'd heard about any weird stuff happening at the house. And keep in mind also, these neighbors don't like Bill. This one in particular really didn't. This neighbor told him that there were ruins of the former manor house on the property. There had also been a cemetery, and stones were taken from both of these sites to build the house that Liz and Bill were renting.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
That could be problematic.
Weird occurrences continued to happen in the house. There would be times when the heat in the house would be unbearable, and other times it would be freezing cold. It was as if polar opposites were fighting in the house, and as we continue to share the crazy things that happened here, that will become more apparent.
The Riches had a pig on the farm that was very tame and sweet. They named her Lucinda. One day, she suddenly seemed to lose her mind and got crazy and wild. It seemed as though she was possessed, and the tame pig became violent. It got so bad that they had to euthanize her. Whatever happened to Lucinda seemed to carry on in the other animals on the property. Eventually, they all had either gone crazy or run away. This included 2 cats, a guinea pig, a dog, and a herd of goats. The next odd occurrence happened in the bathroom. It's always the bathroom.
I know, isn't it? Even in a house.
The water gives some power. The toilet had actually pushed itself up and gone cockeyed, so they called out a plumber. The plumber went into the bathroom and couldn't figure out what the issue was because the toilet was sitting the way it was supposed to.
So by the time the plumber gets there to fix it, he's like, there's nothing wrong with your toilet.
Right. The plumber leaves and the toilet does the same thing. The plumber returns and fixes the toilet and then tells the Riches that he had been to the house before. He had installed central heating for a previous owner and was called back to the house after all the radiators had pulled themselves off the walls. He fixed them all and left. The plumber was called back again because the radiators had pulled free again. The way he was able to stop this from happening again was using screws that had crosses on them. The radiators never pulled away again.
You can imagine they call this plumber in and he's going to be thinking, these people are crazy. They first say that the toilet is cockeyed. I come in, it's not. I come back again, and now it is cockeyed. So he's probably thinking, are they screwing around with me? But in the back of his mind, he knows he's been here before, and the last time he was here was pretty darn chilling.
Yeah, and I'm just curious as to how he got screws with crosses on them. If he just painted them on or what?
Well, that's the way they described it. What I was thinking in my brain, since they didn't describe exactly what this was, is that maybe something other than a Phillips screw was being used, and now these were Phillips screws. I don't know. Maybe it was flatheads before, and so he made sure that these ones were Phillips. I don't know if it just happened these 2 times or if it happened a 3rd time. And so he was like, how am I going to stop this? So then he was like, well, let me try with crosses. So clearly something is happening here. You've got an outside source who's like, this crazy thing happened and now something else crazy is happening here.
Indeed.
Liz then saw her first apparition at the house. She'd been at the store and was coming back into the house when she saw an elderly woman standing in the window wearing modern clothing. Liz sees this apparition again later. This time, the ghost is sitting in a chair near the baby's crib, and she looks sad. The spirit seemed to be a good presence in the house. Later, Liz was talking with the landlord of Helvanog, and she saw a photo of his mother. She realized that was the woman she was seeing in the house. Her name was Marion Holborn, and she died at the age of 95 in 1980. An armchair that she loved had actually come with the house, and that was the chair that Liz had seen the ghost sitting upon. So clearly her spirit is attached to this chair in some way. The sounds of both booted and slippered footsteps continue to be heard in the house, and the electric bills continue to be high. Liz became pregnant again. She'd given birth to Ben the year before, and the second child born in 1990 was a girl they named Becca. Even though Becca was very young when she lived in the house, she still remembers many experiences. One of those was a dream she had over and over where she was being pushed down the stairs.
Yikes.
But she always woke up right before she hit the bottom of the stairs. An interesting connection to this is that the Riches would hear the footsteps going down the stairs, and they always stopped before reaching the bottom.
Oh,
it's almost like Becca's having a dream about whatever's happening with these stairs.
There were moments when the energy in the house seemed clear, but the claustrophobic and oppressive times became more prevalent. The family was desperate for help, so they brought in a trance medium named Larry Harry.
That is what they said his name was, Larry Harry.
Alrighty.
I was like, okay. I think if I was a psychic, I'd want to change my name just so it sounds a little bit more credible. I don't know.
Well, at least it wasn't Harry Larry.
Or go by Lawrence Harry or something.
Yes.
Yeah, Harry Larry would be even worse.
He brought a team with him that included 2 Dutch mediums. The group decided to conduct a seance, and during that, Larry brought forward 4 spirits that he described as an old woman, a mischievous young man, another young man, and something ancient and dark. Bill's teenage son, Lawrence, had been having some issues in the house, and he was becoming angry and hard to deal with. Larry, the medium, felt that Lawrence may have brought something into the house. So Bill decided to send Lawrence away to see if this would get rid of the dark entity. That didn't work. And while it seems harsh that Lawrence was sent away, he later told his dad that he was thankful to have been sent away from the house because he knew it was doing something to him.
It's almost like when we hear the story about the Amityville house, how the father seemed to get more and more dark and depressed, like something was entering him in some way or
manipulating him.
They're being oppressed by something demonic. And so it was like he was feeling that.
Right.
The Riches start sharing a room at night to sleep because the kids are scared. Sometimes Becca's dreams would get so bad that Liz would rush her over to her grandparents' house to stay. Becca saw the old woman's spirit, and she described her as being gray. She literally saw her as a black and white coloring. Isn't that weird?
That is strange.
What I kind of get a feeling is she didn't know how to describe that she was transparent, maybe?
Perhaps.
The spirit would watch her and her brother play, but she felt that it wasn't in a nice way. She would scowl at them. So I can't tell if this old lady is good or bad, or if she's both. I mean, she could be just, an elderly lady who's like, well, these darn kids.
Well, she liked them as babies because they're cute. Babies are cute, and then they turn into precocious toddlers.
Well, that's true. That's probably what happened. That's why she was fine when it was just watching the baby in the crib. But now that they're playing and carrying on and fighting, it's like, meh. Larry Harry returned to the house and conducted an exorcism, and things felt lighter for a while. The feeling of being watched went away, and the electricity normalized. Bill got back into his painting and started painting lots of eyes in the pictures. It was as if he was reliving the feeling of being watched all the time. A neighbor came over and asked Bill to paint a portrait of his horse. And he literally came over on his horse. Liz comes in and goes, Bill, the neighbor wants to talk to you. He goes outside, and here's the neighbor on a horse. And he's like, I want you to paint a picture of my horse. And Bill's like right now? This way? He's like, no, here's a picture of the horse standing in the field. If you would just paint this scene, basically, is what I'm asking for. After Bill finished the painting, the horse died right there in the field in the spot where the picture was taken.
Oh, my word.
So he finishes the picture, and that horse drops dead, like as if it was in the picture and just dropped dead right in the same spot. So that was pretty darn weird. That neighbor stopped talking to Bill and blamed him for the death of the horse. So it's almost like he was like, did Bill curse my horse?
Yeah, there's some witchery going on here.
Could this be related to the haunting, or is it just a weird coincidence?
Bill and Liz started having the same dream, which featured the couple trying to escape the house, but they always ended up back at the house. Bill started getting cracks in his hands, as though his hands had been cut several times. This issue lasted for months, and doctors couldn't find a good treatment for it. Some believed it was a form of eczema from stress. A reporter came to the house to cover the story of the fight the Riches were having with the electric company. The bills were going up again. The reporter met the cameraman outside, and they joked about the stories of haunting activity rumored to be happening at the house. After going inside and sitting down at the table, the reporter heard what she described as a primal growl. The cameraman whipped off his headphones and asked, "What was that?" Liz responded, "Apparently, it isn't happy that you are here."
So this is an audible sound that they all heard, and clearly it didn't bother Liz, so it's something she must have heard before, because she's like, well, it probably doesn't like you.
Yeah. Nothing else happened after that, but it left the reporter and cameraman unnerved to the point that the reporter remembered it 30 years later.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Liz contacted a local historian to see if she could dig up a history about Hale Vanog. She found an old map that showed the barn from the farm and 3 other farmsteads. All the way back to the 19th century, people on these properties had nothing but bad luck. This was in regards to finances, disputes, and other things. The historian said that the land was said to be cursed, and she referred to it as Wales' Bermuda Triangle. Shortly after this revelation, Liz and the kids saw another apparition in the house. They had a passageway in the house that always felt creepy, and the whole family hated walking down it. The kids wouldn't go unless Liz carried them, and one day she was doing just that when she saw a very tall figure that was dark that seemed to come through the wall. It felt menacing, but Liz couldn't see a face on it. She told the kids to repeat over and over that they didn't believe in ghosts, and the figure seemed to go away. But then one of the kids yelled that the shadow man was behind them. He then went away. I can't imagine you're carrying your kid and you're like, oh, good, it went away. And then all of a sudden it's, Mommy, 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 it's behind us.
People wondered why the Riches wouldn't just leave the house that was terrorizing them. As is the case with so many people stuck in a haunted house, finances prevented them from moving. All their money had been wrapped up in the house, especially with the large electric bills. Bill was getting little work. The couple went to the Housing Commission for help and were turned away. They finally ran away to Liz's mom's house, but they felt they were followed. They heard voices coming across the baby monitor. Bill went to check on the kids, and Liz heard him going into the room, but the voices never stopped. Bill saw nothing.
As we know, I don't know that they were really followed because baby monitors are notorious for picking up other things. And this is in the early 90s. So a radio station. I mean, there's anything that it could have been picking up, other baby monitors. So I've never given any credence to that. And we know now they even hack into them and start talking to the kids. So
this is true.
I don't know that that was really anything.
Bill eventually returned back to the farm and took up his painting again. His pictures became more and more disturbing, and he started drinking heavily. After Liz returned with the kids, she noticed that Bill would rarely come out of his studio, and she finally went in and became angry with him, demanding that he start being a father again.
The Riches were going to need more help, and even though Liz wasn't a religious woman, she went to talk to a vicar. His name was Reverend David Holmwood, and he had conducted numerous exorcisms and considered himself an expert in the paranormal. He agreed to help the Riches, but told them he would need time to prepare, which ended up taking months. Everything was set to get underway in June of 1991. The Riches met up with the Reverend, and they drove up to the farm with him. Holmwood had also brought along a woman named Anita, who was a reformed Satanist. As the group approached the farm, a large owl flew straight into the windshield, cracking it and forcing the car off the road. They were unnerved, but pressed forward. After arriving at the house, they split into two groups. Bill and the Reverend went to his studio, while the women decided to go to the kitchen and start praying. About mid-prayer, Anita yelled for Holmwood. Liz had become possessed. Her face was distorted, and she laughed weirdly. The possession lasted for a very short time, and Liz claimed that she felt violated by this entity that entered her without permission.
Reverend Holmwood would carry on exorcisms for months, bringing some relief for bits of time. The local historian visited Liz and announced she had found more information on the history of the property. During Victorian times, there was a farm down the road from Hale Van Og named Cumgoody Farm. In 1848, there was a really bloody and nasty murder. The victim was Thomas Edwards, who was a farmhand at Cumgoody. His friend and fellow farm worker, James Griffiths, was thought to be the perpetrator. He hit Edwards on the back of the head with an axe and stole what little money he had. Griffiths then hid the body in a manure pile. The police found it because when they kicked the pile, a large pool of blood flowed out. The police didn't think the murder took place at Cumgoody, and there was a theory that it took place at Hale Van Og.
The Reverend told Bill that he needed to burn a bulk of his paintings because they were feeding the spirit or being used by the spirit at the farm. This really crushed Bill's spirit, and one day when Liz arrived home from shopping, she found Bill on the floor in the kitchen. He was weeping, and he tells her that he came into the kitchen and found a knife on the table. At first he was angry because he thinks, Liz has left this knife out here on the table where the kids can get at it. Very dangerous. After grabbing the knife to put it away, Bill felt an overwhelming desire to kill himself with the knife. He put the knife in the drawer and turned away. When he turned back, the knife was back out on the counter.
Oh my goodness.
So then I think that's when he dropped to the floor and just, waited for Liz to get home and save him, basically.
Despite the trouble that the Riches had with animals on the property, they decided to bring home a Doberman. It didn't take long before the dog wasn't doing well, so Liz took it to the vet. During the visit, Liz tentatively told the vet what had been going on at the house because she was sure the woman would think she was crazy. The vet stopped what she was doing and asked Liz where she lived. After hearing Hale Van Og, the vet explained that she knew the place well and had known the previous owner. While that woman never said she had any issues at the farm, the vet sure did. She would go and care for the animals when the woman was out of town, and she always felt dread at the house. And she heard the disembodied footsteps many times. She said that she felt pure hate at that house.
On March 13th, 1995, a man named Eddie Burks arrived at the farm. He was a ghost hunter who was introduced to the couple by a friend of Bill's because he had garnered a bit of celebrity in 1993 when he helped with a haunting at a bank. This was the Queen's Bank in Coots. They'd contacted him to deal with an alleged ghost at its prestigious Strand headquarters, which was located in central London. Supposedly, it was being haunted by the troubled soul of Thomas Howard, who was the 4th Duke of Norfolk. He'd been executed for treason in 1572. So now it's hanging out here at the bank for some reason. And apparently, he was able to free the bank from whatever trouble they were having there. And I mean, it was reported in the newspaper and everything. So
Wow.
seems like it must have been a little bit legit. He goes on later to become part of a British paranormal television documentary series called Ghost Hunters on an episode called The Man Who Talks to Ghosts. And that was a good way to describe himself because he basically thought of himself as a psychic therapist. So instead of coming in and like talking to the ghosts, he listened to them, which is what you and I have been trying to do a lot.
Indeed.
When the Riches ask if he is there to do a seance, he says no, he just wants to listen. Burks immediately picks up on two boys and decides to focus on one of them first. The boy is named Thomas, and Eddie sees through his eyes. The time is the Victorian era, and Thomas is in the woods where it seems he sees something horrific happening to a woman. He rushed back to the farm where he lived, and he told his friend James what he saw. This is James Griffiths, so now you're seeing we're getting the two names that we've heard before.
Then Thomas got blind drunk at a pub and started talking about what he saw. This was stupid because it got back to the group of men who had done this thing, and they were going to shut him up. These men forced James to do it, or they would kill his family. Eddie said he's going to let Thomas go and talk to the other boy. This spirit says he is James, and that he didn't speak up at his trial because he thought the group of men would save him. That didn't happen, and James was hanged. James tells Eddie that what Thomas saw was the master of the manor house and some of his cronies violating the woman. So they died to protect that man, and this is why they still haunt this area.
So we've had Larry Harry come here, and he's seen 4 entities. So apparently we've got the elderly woman who seems to be the landlord's mother. Then we have 2 boys. One of them is mischievous. The other is just regular. They kept calling them boys, but as you see in this story, he goes to the bar and is getting drunk. So I'm thinking they're teenagers at least.
Right.
So we've got both of them, but we still don't know what is this dark entity that's hanging around here. After Eddie leaves, it seems that he left open a portal, which he had opened so the boys could pass through. So he was trying to help them leave, which I've never thought psychics were able to do anyway. Hale Van Og seemed to become a transit center for ghosts. Liz claims they started seeing dozens of spirits. One of those spirits that Liz saw was a boy missing half of his face. Now, maybe this was possibly Thomas, and she's actually seeing him now rather than just hearing.
Right.
The next electric bill was normal, but this was short-lived. The meter went crazy again, and Liz wanted to ask Eddie to come back. Bill said that he thinks something else is the issue. Something he got involved in years before.
Uh-oh.
This is like when your husband grabs your hand and goes, "Honey, I got something to tell you." And you're like, "Oh God, I don't want to know." He tells Liz that he was a witch. It seems that a man named Alex Sanders was house-sitting the flat below Bill's right after he graduated college. Some people out there, especially if you're over in Britain, probably have heard about Alex Sanders. He was called the King of the Witches by tabloid newspapers. He conducted rituals for the rich and the famous in the 60s, so he was very well known. The men became friends, and Alex said he would help Bill become a witch, and this would in turn give him success with his art. Bill saw the power in Alex, and he wanted that. He participated in a ritual. Now, about halfway through the ritual, I don't know if he gets uncomfortable, but he's like, "Let's stop. I don't want to do this." But the door was already opened. This was very dangerous because the energy had already been raised. The gateway was open and quite possibly could have affected him later. The BBC Witch Farm show that I said is where we'd heard about this interviewed Maxine, who was Alex's wife at the time, and she recalled Bill being the only initiate that had ever stopped a ritual before. She definitely felt that could be the issue. So she's like, "We had never experienced this before where we're doing this, and it's a dangerous process, clearly." And she's like, "He stopped it in the middle, so I don't even think they knew what to do with it." So it's almost like they left something on him, and this thing is like going to be angry now, and it's just attached itself to Bill almost for the rest of his life, it would seem. And so he's thinking, as he's telling Liz about this, maybe this is what's happening here. And quite possibly this is where this dark entity is coming from.
Eddie did return to the house and conduct a final exorcism that seemed to help a bit. He at least closed the portal.
I just want to point out something. When I hear about them having to do multiple exorcisms, I don't know if it's because Bill is not making sure that things are getting closed up. Because for me, if you're doing an exorcism in the right way and you're doing it in Jesus Christ, it's once and done. There shouldn't be any issue. So when you have to keep doing this over and over again, either you're not doing it properly or those people aren't taking care of things. If people will recall some of the stories in the Bible where Jesus is getting spirits out of people, it says specifically, you sweep that house out, you got to keep it clean, or that spirit's going to come back and bring buddies with him so that it's going to be even worse than it was before.
Right.
I don't know if the people that are working here with Liz and Bill aren't counseling them through what else do we need to do to keep this going. You don't just go in and clean it and then be like, see ya. I mean, you have to help people learn how to continue the process.
Yeah. In 1996, Liz's grandfather died, and she inherited enough money that the couple were able to buy a house in a nearby village. The darkness never left Bill. Liz felt he was destroyed physically, spiritually, and mentally after they left the farm. He deteriorated quickly, losing his license after drunk driving. Becca remembers her dad drinking a lot. Liz and Bill separated, and Bill was eventually found in a bad state by his landlady. He was hospitalized and put on life support and died 3 days later. The drink killed him, but could have Hale Van Og made things worse for him?
There are many theories as to what was causing the haunting at Hale Van Og, and again, I encourage people to listen to the Witch Farm series. It was really good because they had a lot of people who would write in and they would do like a case update every so often with people making suggestions about, well, maybe this is what was going on. Some people thought that local farmers were upset that they had an Englishman living on a Welsh farm and that they may have done something to the animals and that perhaps they told stories of curses and other things to scare the family away. That's why they tell legends all the time, to scare people. So were they just ramping things up and putting things in their mind?
Yeah, mental state.
Other people thought that the animals were affected by illness, possibly ergot poisoning from grains that caused hallucinations and death. And this is also an old house. Maybe it's causing the family to have some issues too.
Black mold.
A lot of us wonder if the Salem witch hunts was based on those girls having some kind of ergot poisoning and hallucinations, and that's why they were acting so weird. These seem far-fetched, but one very real possibility are ley lines. Ley line experts visited the property and detected ley lines running below the property, and they went in there with dowsing rods and were checking everything. These seemed to be streams of dark energy, and one was below the electricity meter, which may have been the cause of the power surges. So you got the meter right there, and it's like, One dowser who came to the house found what he called black streams. These are ley lines from radiation, and apparently 2 black streams crossed under the barn. And then, of course, there was the murder, which could be contributing to this. I mean, that's clearly why you have some spirits here. The interesting thing about that radiation, where they think it might have been coming from, even though this is Wales, they think it might have been coming from Chernobyl.
Oh, wow.
Because, it would have gone, that radiation has to go somewhere. And so they're wondering if some of that came out there, because I think at the time there were Welsh farmers that were having issues from radiation affecting animals and their crops.
Interesting. Liz told Wales Online, I know people will just think we're weird people and we're making it all up, but you would have to have one hell of an imagination to make all this up. It felt dangerous in that house. The kids always slept with me. I wouldn't let them sleep on their own. I definitely felt very threatened there. When you've met evil, you know it. Ghosts don't scare me now because I've come up against so much evil in my life. That's the truth.
And honestly, she's never actually had any other experiences. Once they left Hale Van Og, she's never had a paranormal experience since. Mark Chadbourne wrote the book Testimony in 1996 about Hale Van Og, and in it he writes, a dozen people of varying degrees of credulity, differing ages, sex, and religious persuasion are convinced something beyond the bounds of reason happened at Hale Van Og between November 1989 and June 1995. Something supernatural, something evil. This wasn't a simple haunting. This was human lives pushed to the limit by a malignant force which exhibited a terrifying sentience. A battle not only for the sanity of Hale Van Og's bewildered, increasingly distressed residents, but ultimately for their very souls. I was drawn to the story of the Rich family by an article which appeared in The Independent, a newspaper not renowned for fantastic supposition. It told of a house where strange things happened, where electricity was drained from the system for no reason. It also hinted at other, darker things which it decided, in its wisdom, to leave well alone. I, not being particularly wise, wanted to know more. I rang the Riches and chatted to them about their experiences, ostensibly to write an article for a magazine, but also because my curiosity was piqued. You see, I've always wanted to know if there was something more. As a journalist talking to people all the time, you realize most folk are inherently truthful when talking about their experiences. They don't fabricate. So on a human level, you come to realize that all those who claim a brush with the supernatural can't be lying. There must be something there. Why aren't there more investigations? As Bill Rich and I talked, I realized The Independent had only scratched the surface of what had happened in that house. There was an interesting story to tell on many levels if I could cope with the chills that were crawling all over my skin. A story not just of the supernatural, but of raw human emotions as ordinary people struggled to cope in the face of madness, of how lives can be unbalanced by the real world and those who claim to be spiritual saviors. And I was angered by how these two people could be treated by the arrogance of those who refuse to believe, called liars or fools because they dared to talk about an experience at odds with the scientific rationale.
The people that live at the farm now have been there for 25 years and never experienced anything out of the ordinary. The story of Hale Van Og is an incredible story, practically unbelievable. And yet there were many witnesses and something clearly changed the lives of several people. Is the witch farm haunted?
That is for you to decide. On the very final episode of the BBC's The Witch Farm, they actually got a letter from the people who live there because they didn't want to be part of this. They asked them, of course, if they would be part of it, and they wanted to film inside if they could. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. Well, after they had listened to several of the episodes, they wrote, and it was a great letter. I encourage people just to listen to that final episode. It's not that they're making light of the haunting, but they're explaining how whatever was there is definitely gone now. There's even sparrows that have built their nest on top of the electric meter. So if there's something disturbing about ley lines under there, it's not doing that anymore.
Interesting.
Now, there was stuff going on here before the Riches moved in. At first, I would be like, maybe there was a darkness about Bill that he brought into this house. I think it's a combination of things. I think we already had a haunted property because of maybe the murder that had happened here that had never been really solved or taken care of, or it's just tragic circumstances about the whole thing. You have a regular person in our time period, this elderly woman. Maybe she was very attached to the house.
Sure.
Attached to that chair. I don't know. Maybe she was trying to protect the children from whatever the dark entity is. I really feel like that was something attached to Bill.
I do too.
And I think it was affecting him specifically, and it was manifesting in certain ways. So when he's out of the house, you've definitely taken that thing out. And unfortunately, I don't know if he became an alcoholic because he was trying to deal with the fact that he had this attachment to him, or if he already was an alcoholic and that was just another part of him. I don't know, but it's just very tragic how his life ended. But they interview Liz throughout this series, and she seems very believable to me. Becca definitely. They didn't talk to Ben. He did show up for one of the final episode and talked a little bit. These people definitely experienced something.
Right.
And they weren't getting rich off of it or famous off of it.
No, it doesn't sound that way at all.
Because has anybody ever heard of the Witch Farm? I heard about it in passing, and I looked into it, and I went, oh, there's a whole series about it. And I started listening to the series, and I'm like, we don't usually do shows like this, and it's more of a current thing. But for our creepy October, because we like to get a little bit more creepy in October, let's go ahead and throw this in there. So I think something definitely was going on here.
Yeah, I agree.
I will say, however, when you listen to the series, it's like watching a TV show where they gotta dramatize the thing.
This is true.
So,
because I did listen to it.
The guy who hosts it is a lot over the top. So he's hard to take a little bit. And they do have actors portraying the real people and speaking for them. And then they do have the real people in between. So I felt like it was like watching a paranormal program on TV, only you're listening to it.
Right, correct.
So just go into it with that. But once you get past that, it's very, very interesting story. Something else that's interesting is our website. You check it out at
Queen of the Segways.
You check it out at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. We want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Have a good one, guys.
You can find History Goes Bump on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Google Play, and anywhere you can listen to podcasts.
Lorillard came from a family of wealthy Tobago. It's Tobago, not
I
tobacco.
smoke some tobacco or
And I was about to say Tobago.
tomato, whatever.
How about tobacco? Lorillard didn't care much for the jackets men wore because the tails were hard to sit.
The tails just sat by themselves. Sit, tails, sit. Good tails.
Good tails.
Join us as we share the compelling hunting.
Hunting. You do go ghost hunting.
Pew, pew.